Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining, for those who are here in person and also online. A little bit about the two groups that are organizing this event. The Sanford Latin American and Caribbean Student Group has the mission to lead and support academic, career, outreach, cultural, and social efforts of the Sanford community focused on Latin America and the Caribbean in order to strengthen collaboration and engagement between Latin America and Sanford. And the other group who's organizing the event is Sanford Pride, who work to foster a supportive, inclusive community for the LGBTQ+ individuals at Sanford School of Public Policy. We work directly with the administration to develop policies and programming that support all individuals at Sanford, with the purpose to create a safe space for the community members and socialize and share their experiences. Also, to say thank you to our sponsors. The principal sponsor is the Duke Center of International Development, and the event is also sponsored by the Sanford School of Public Policy, the Duke Center of International and Global Studies, and the Center for Latin America and the Caribbean Studies. So thank you so much for joining us again, and for believing in the importance of this event for the Sanford community, but also in general for everyone who is trying to understand and work in policies. We created this event because we are aware that sexual and gender minorities in Latin America have experienced fewer legal inequalities in the recent years for LGBTQ population, but people still have fewer legal protections and benefits than the cisgender heterosexual population due to multiple obstacles. LGBTIQ+ activists face backlash from social and religious conservatives, and some leaders, including presidents, are openly antagonistic towards LGBTIQ rights. There is a huge misconception in politics where people believe that the only consequence of governments neglecting LGBTQ rights is that we cannot get married or we cannot buy houses together, and that is wrong. Government neglect towards sexual minorities translate into psychological and physical violence from our families and security forces who are supposed to protect us in the first place, but also from random people in the streets who can even allow us to walk undisturbed. It translates into job and school discrimination and fewer development opportunities overall. It means poverty and hunger. It means denial of the right to have an ID that reflects who we really are, which is the most basic of rights. And it means healthcare plans that do not consider our needs and having to face a stigma from physicians and nurses that sometimes even refuse to touch the body of a trans person. It means that in Latin America, the life expectancy of a trans woman does not exceed 40 years. And there are higher rates of mental health issues, such as depression and anxiety in our communities, that many times leads to suicide. We have higher suicide rates as well. And this is not because being gay or trans comes with depression. It is because how the way of experiencing discrimination and hate from an early age impacts in our mental health. So it is important for us to realize, especially if we want to work in policies, that every time that we advocate for support LGBTQ+ rights, we are fighting for all these forms of violence and discrimination that we have struggled against for so long to finally end. We also understand that the experience of being queer or LGBTQ+ is not restrictive. Being sexually or gender diverse also intersects with being a woman, being a Latino, being Black, Indigenous, Asian, being poor, having a disability, being Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, or more than one of these at the same time. So until there is absolute equality for LGBTIQ+ people, there won't be real equality for any of those groups or communities either. So today, to speak about these issues, we have three amazing speakers who are joining us, who come precisely from countries where the fight for LGBTIQ+ rights is still being fought, and who, despite the fact of having a majority in Congress and very conservative groups against them, have achieved amazing things for minorities in the Latin American region. First of all, here in person is Alberto de Belaunde, who is a Peruvian lawyer and LGBTIQ+ rights advocate, who was re-elected congressman with the second highest vote in the country. He promoted the approval of a bill to create a civil union in Peru between people of the same sex. He also signed the bill for equal marriage and gender identity, and was one of the promoters of the legislative decree 1323 against hate crimes. He was recognized with the Tammy Badwin Breakthrough Award, an award given by the International Organization Victor Institute to LGBTIQ+ leaders around the world. Joining us from Venezuela, we have Tamara Adrián, who is a Venezuelan lawyer, college teacher, LGBTIQ+ activist, and women's rights advocate. She was elected to the National Assembly of Venezuela in the 2015 Venezuelan parliamentary election, and she's noted as the first transgender person elected to office in Venezuela, and only the second transgender member of a national legislature in the Western Hemisphere. During her term in office, she intends to promote proper access to public records of identity, same-sex marriage, and human rights. And finally, from Guatemala, we have Sandra Morán, who is a Guatemalan politician and lesbian woman who was elected to the Guatemalan Congress in 2015 as the first LGBTQ person ever elected to the national legislature in Guatemala. She's a long-time LGBTQ+ feminist and activist, as well as a popular educator and artist. She was an organizer of Guatemala's first lesbian group in 1995 and its first LGBT Pride event in 1998. She joined Guatemala's human rights movement in high school when she was 14 years old. And currently, she is the coordinator of the Berta Cáceres International Feminist School. So I ask a few claps for them. We thank you all for being here. We're going to start with a few words from them to give a brief statement of how things are and what they are bringing us today. Starting with Alberto, please join us in first. Thank you, Rob.
Hola, hello, how are you? I'm really glad to be here. I want to thank Duke University and Gonzalo for the invitation. And I'm really glad to be with my friends, Tamara and Sandra. Hi, how are you? It's hard to talk about Latin America, like it's that all the countries are the same. Because you know there's a lot of countries in Latin America and the realities are different. But still, I remember when I was writing my first book, and actually I got to interview both Tamara and Sandra, that a friend of mine asked me why there were countries in Latin America that really achieved a lot in a small amount of time in the LGBTQ fight, like Argentina, and why there are countries like Peru that are still really behind. And there's no an easy answer. Of course, every country is different, and they have their own special things. But I think there's a way of talking about the whole region without being unfair. And I think if you look at Latin America, the places that are moving forward and have really some things to show, like a marriage equality law, the gender identity law, and policies that includes LGBTQ people, are the countries with better institutionality. And when I talk about institutionality, I would like to talk about two types of institutionality. The political one and the one regarding the judiciary system. As you know, the two main paths in Latin America for gaining recognition of LGBT rights are through the parliamentary process, getting a bill approved, or through the judiciary process, getting a major, big win in a case, getting a ruling that will apply not only to that case, but also to the whole country. So when we talk about institutionality in the political arena, we're talking about a political party system that tries to incorporate the demands of the social movement. And you have political parties that try to organize around an ideology or around specific subjects for public policies. They have a platform, a programmatic platform. This is the case of Argentina. This is the case of Uruguay. And I think that it's been the case also for Chile, countries that got their LGBT laws approved through Congress because the social movement found in Parliament the way of achieving these laws. Because you had big political traditions in each country that respond to progressive or liberal political ideas. The second path is through courts. And here you find Colombia, you can find Brazil or Ecuador, where it doesn't matter where the political scene is going, if it's a conservative or a progressive Congress, but you have a judiciary system independent enough and with judges that understand or have a human rights education that decide to rule in favor of LGBTQ people without taking notice of the polls or political pressures. So if you try to understand Latin America's lack of success or success in the LGBTQ agenda, I think that these institutionality glasses are helpful. And we will talk about, of course, the Peruvian case, and I'm sure that Sandra will talk about Guatemala and Tamara about Venezuela, where there are these three countries are, I think, one of the most left behind countries when we talk about the LGBTQ agenda. In the case of Peru, we don't have a political party system. We don't have a strong institutionality in politics. I always say that we don't have political parties. I call them electoral movements because they're usually created for every electoral process around a charismatic leader without clear ideas or a programmatic point of view. And they're always trying to get the most votes possible to get into power. The only thing that matters in that kind of system is to get into power. So when you try to work the LGBT agenda inside these electoral movements, the answer is, this is not a popular issue. You are gonna cost us votes, so we are not gonna assume this as part of our agenda. And of course, when you work in advocacy and you start working with congresspersons in Congress, then 5 years later, the whole system changes. You have new parties, you have new congresspersons. In Peru, they just banned the possibility of re-election. So you will get new people every 5 years, so it's really hard for the LGBT movement to actually make alliances in politics that will last for a long time. And if you see at the judiciary system, what you see is that in the lower courts, actually there are starting to be good news. In the last 3 years, we have 3 cases that got important rulings in favor of marriage equality. The problem is when it goes up to the next level, they get turned down. Because if you analyze the judiciary system in Peru, you could see that we're still fighting for having independent judges and courts that does not respond to political pressure. And maybe it's true in the lower courts that we're getting more professional judges, but it's still challenging in higher courts. So for me, it's really interesting to think about or trying to explain Latin America through this theory, because it shows you the importance of institutionality. Usually it's an abstract concept that it's only part of the debate in political science class. But this is a way of showing the importance of institutionality on a daily basis. You need a democracy that takes everybody into account and that respect and recognize everybody's rights. And it doesn't matter if it's a popular subject or not. Institutions shouldn't care about popularity or shouldn't care about specific ideologies or political pressures. Institutions are there to work for every citizen. So I think that it's going to be really hard for our countries in Latin America to move forward, not only for the LGBT agenda, but I'm also thinking about the women's rights agenda or the indigenous people agenda, if we don't create a government and institutions, public institutions, that really understand the idea of being independent and of being citizen-oriented. So that's the first idea I want to share with you today. Thank you.
For the ones who are online, you can leave your questions in the chat box. And now we are going to Tamara, who also have 10 minutes to get her first words.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity for being here with Duke and in the context of this very important seminar. I will address a few different items than those that were treated just before, because I guess that when you talk about LGBTI rights, you cannot, one, forget the nature of denial of rights to LGBTI population, and two, you cannot forget the intersectionalities that affect and overlap the situation and worsen, in many cases, the situation of discrimination of LGBTI people all around the world, and particularly in the case of Latin America. With regard to the first question, we cannot forget that all along of the history, we have seen the existence of what we now call segregationist laws. These laws denied rights to certain groups just because of who they are, and particularly they are based in bias and prejudices that are incorporated into the society and constitute a big part of what the society needs in order to suppress or put beyond the limits of the limits of the society, beyond the borders of the society, these groups. These kind of laws have existed with regard to race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, national origin, etc., etc., etc. And then when we talk about the laws that do deny equal rights to LGBTI population in a country, we cannot forget that these same law or different laws, but they had the same effect. For instance, let's just remember where the Supreme Court of Justice of the United States decided to declare unconstitutional the racial segregation. It was the case of loving marriage, and it was just a case of mixed marriage. And that is why the same Supreme Court of Justice, when decided the case for equal marriage in the United States, quoted long portions of this case of loving case back in 1967. The second remark is that discrimination in general is not alone, and that in many cases you have several grounds for discrimination accumulated in one single person. That may be race or religion or disability or national origin or other causes of bias or discrimination that overlap over sexual orientation and gender identity and make sometimes much more worse the situation for social inclusion and equal rights for these groups that are therefore put aside of the society. So I forgot to mention, of course, HIV or to mention other illnesses that might or social or health conditions that may affect societal inclusion of certain number of people. In this context, we see how denial of equal rights is just a form of emphasis for groups that dominate the society, that they still in power, and they consider other persons inferior, and they are so inferior in the view of these people that are not allowed to have the same rights that the rest of the population. In this context is the context in which we fight. And as it was said before, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights have decided in two cases, one in the case of the consultative opinion for El Salvador, Costa Rica, for the case of recognition of the identity for trans people and equal marriage. And second, much more recently, just this year, the 28th of June of this year, the case of Vicky Hernandez against Honduras, in which it was vastly described how deeply exclusion impact the access to education, the access to healthcare, the access to a decent lodgement, the access to basic rights for LGBTI people, and particularly in the case of Vicky Hernandez against Honduras, against people, trans people, and must be mentioned also intersex people. And in this context, I will finish by saying that we have in Latin America make huge advancements in some countries. You have now equal marriage in 26 states of Mexico, in Costa Rica and Colombia, Ecuador, Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, and in Chile. They are under discussion at this moment. And Bolivia, somehow they have a judicial decision that allowed the registration for a same-sex couple. You have the recognition of the identity of trans people in 16 states of Mexico, in Costa Rica, in Colombia, in Ecuador, in Brazil, in Uruguay, in Argentina, in Chile, Bolivia. And In Peru, you have some cases, judicial cases, that have allowed the recognition of identity for trans people. And you have left behind in all other countries the LGBTI people, and you have them considered to be second-class citizens, and you note that hate crimes are not investigated nor punished, and you know that nobody cares if a trans person is dismembered in the street just in a hate crime. Nobody cares about the exclusion of schools of LGBTI people, and the fact that they are not able to complete their studies because the prejudices and bias against them and the lack of public policies. Nobody cares about these things in many countries, and there is so much to be done and so much left in order to achieve equality in our countries. And thank you very much. I think I completed my 10 minutes.
Thank you, Tamara. Sandra?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here to this panel, and I'm glad to see Alberto and Tamara. And hi. Okay, I think to continue with the ideas and sharings that my compañeras have done, I think we are living now a backlash everywhere in the world, and more in our countries where the conservative forces are very powerful. And that backlash has also have made also more difficult to continue with the public policies that we start having in our countries. In Guatemala, we start discussing a public policy for the recognition of all the human rights of the LGBTIQ plus community, but that stopped to be the government didn't continue to work in that public policy, and is now going backwards in all the events that we trying to achieve. For example, in the health system, many different organizations have signed some agreements with this health ministry. But right now that is getting weak. People is not getting in anywhere with the papers that they sign, and instead of going forward, we are going backwards because the government is getting even more conservative, and they continue saying that every action that we are doing belong to that gender ideology, that supreme family, supreme good education for children, and that give wrong ideas and destroy marriage and family. Then that narrative is getting more is getting big now, and more political parties are using that narrative in the way that we cannot talk about those proposals into the Congress, for example, or into the different working committees between deputies and the executive. Then I was in the Congress the last period, I left in January 2020. We have Aldo Davila as a deputy right now, but he has been criminalized, and right now is a persecution, legal persecution against him. And then if I was the first lesbian, he's the first gay person into the Congress. But if I open a space, Aldo is trying to maintain that space there, but is getting backwards and persecuted. And then we feel that the context that we are in now is more difficult than 2 years ago. We have this year we suffer the killing of 14 trans women in the country, and also the pandemic has affect directly the life of the people, of the LGBT people, but more the trans people, because they are their work was the ones who was suspended by during the pandemic, last year and part of this year. And then the life of the LGBT people has been more difficult right now. Then, first of all, the context, the global context, the backlash is very hard. Second, that backlash in Guatemala is getting more difficult and are getting more powerful. And then the reality, the economic reality is difficult too. And then the pandemic. Then all those 4 elements are getting more difficult, the life of the community. But still, for example, we have a new organization right now talking about the mothers and fathers of trans children. And that is very important, that for the first time ever in Guatemala, we are listening about trans children and listening about knowing that their parents are organizing themselves in order to talk about it. And that is very important. Even though that situation, the organization are still working, are still asking for this public policy, asking for the rights to be respected, and also trying to introduce again the bills about hate crimes and about gender identity. Those bills that I introduced, that they are trying to do it again with Aldo. The thing that I'm saying is, even though the situation is very hard, we still are working, and we still are fighting, and we still are organizing ourselves. Next week, I'm going to be in a seminar with many organizations, LGBT, from the community. And the idea is to reinforce the actions for the next elections, and to reinforce the actions of the civil society that ask for political parties to know that there is the community, that there's people, prepared people that can be known as the possibility of participating in the next elections in Guatemala that is next year. Then we still are fighting. We are getting, trying to maintain the organizations and trying to organize ourselves in the national level. In that way, we can be stronger and we can maintain our work. Then, as Tamara was saying before we started, well, we continue fighting, we continue talking about the issues, we continue denouncing the violence and denouncing that their rights are being affected, and we will continue to organize ourselves because it's not other way to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sandra, for those words. So very powerful. I guess that the first question for the three of you will be like, we know there is like a disparity between countries. There are some countries that have achieved identity rights, marriage equality, and some countries that are a little bit behind. What would you say, like in your words, that are the key difference? What has happened in these countries that are not happening in our countries, right? I once heard that, for instance, in Peru, it's very difficult to have a strong national LGBTQ movement because of geographical conditions. We have three different regions who actually do not fully understand each other. So it's kind of hard to create a full block of LGBTQ movement in Peru. We have a very strong one, maybe in Lima and a few cities, but we don't have that national-wide. While I think in Argentina, they have this kind of national movement that can respond quickly to defend and promote their rights. So is maybe there are regional conditions, so it's a legal structure or a lack of popular support? What would you say in brief words are the key difference between the countries that have more rights now and the ones who are a little behind? First, Alberto.
I will go back to the idea of institutionality as a key part of democracy, of getting democracy to work for everybody. But of course, there's a problem with civil society organization and the social movement. In Peru, as you know, we have a terrorist problem that was a really important case of political violence in the country that really affected the social movement in Peru. Then the liberalization process of the 90s affected the unions organizations in the country. And these two historical processes explain why it's so hard for the LGBTQ movement to make alliances with other civil society organizations. If you see around the world, usually the LGBT movement gets to work beside other social movements. But in Peru, the social movement is really weak. And you can see when there are, for example, students protests in the streets, and you compare them with other countries in the region, and you see that they are not so massive and important like in other countries. So it's really hard to get people mobilized. Of course, there are geographical reasons, there are economic reasons in some part of the countries. Also, I think that the education system in Peru, both private and public, center the formal education experience in transferring knowledge and not into forming citizens. So you have a lot of people that go to school, but then don't know how to be citizens. They didn't have the tools to develop critical thinking, to develop the idea of community, the idea of debate inside the community, the idea of how to work with diversity, the idea of how to respect other points of view, but also the idea that democracy is not only going to the polls every 5 years, but also to get involved in a lot of these different discussions. Right now, in a lot of our countries, the main civil organization in the streets are the evangelical churches that are against a lot of our human rights agenda. So it's really hard because you don't have no political parties, and when they see the people mobilizing, they see this ultra-conservative movement that is really, it's really appealing for them because it's a way of trying to get more votes in the next election. So I think that's one of the reasons why you see, and you can see the difference between a country like Peru or a country like Argentina, where they not only have a big national federation, but also they were capable of making alliances with other strong social movements in the country that were connected to political parties. So there was a way of institutionalize the demands of the social movement. In countries with weak democracies like Peru, that's harder.
Thank you, Alberto. Tamara?
Okay, thank you very much for this question. I think it is of the essence to respond it properly. And I guess that we must understand that there is around 45 countries in the world where you barely can speak about democracy, or not at all. You have 40 some countries in the world which are autocracies, which are dictatorships, or are even worst, they are totalitarian regimes. In none of these countries you will find equal rights. And it does not depend on the fact that these regimes are left-hand or right-hand regimes. It depends on the fact that these regimes are basically authoritarian regimes. And in general, you will not find equal rights in any authoritarian regime. So in Latin America, for instance, to talk about equal rights in Nicaragua, in Venezuela, or in Cuba, it's completely unlikely. And it is the same for those countries which are autocratic or are dictatorships, or in which democracy, it's not being authoritarian regimes or dictatorship, the separation of powers and the independence of the powers, it's very weak or is almost not existent. In those countries, you will not find either equal rights. And as has been said before, I guess that then what we have is to promote democracy, democratic rules, independency of powers, and have a strong division of powers. For instance, in Venezuela, we have decided not to use the courts anymore for strategic litigation, because now, and for a long time now, it is unlikely for you to get a decision, and you will just be frustrated, or in the best of the cases, having a decision against what you have a request, or in the worst of the cases, just you will wait for years and years and years and years for the case to be resolved, and that will be unlikely that a decision is rendered in those cases. So I guess Sandra said that it's necessary to organize people. Yes, it is a very important task to organize, to organize LGBTI population as well as other discriminated population, and create a grassroots, strong group of organizations that might, in some cases, be the inspiration for many other young activists that are coming behind and want to participate in this fight, and to probably in one moment, if you see that the many people are working in favor of equal rights, and they are making noise and they have little power to be visible, that might be the shifting pendulum that will change minds and hearts for people. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. Sandra?
Yes, I think here in Guatemala, we are talking about a movement that it has a difficulty to grow because the majority of people is in the closet. And that's a difficult issue because although young people is now getting out of the closet easier, still we are just a few. The second thing is some of the leaders that we have in the movement have died because COVID, and that is going to affect a lot the movement. This has been very sad because yeah, we lost, for example, Debbie Maya, a trans woman who was the leader of trans, one of the main organization in Guatemala, and Marco Loarca, who was the leader of a gay lesbian trans organization that was organizing people in different parts of the country and focus more into the organizing people in the rural areas. So then we have those lost from COVID last year and this year, and then there's a few people there's a few organizations, there's networks, but still it's not a big and huge movement. And also we have a relationship with others movements, and now more and more there are LGBT people from indigenous people. No, before the indigenous people were saying that among their communities, they didn't have any gay people or lesbian. Now it's more and more you see even trans women as indigenous people with their own clothes and openly working and being part of community. That's something good. Then even though we have this huge and difficult context, we still have some openings that where we are using and trying to maintain the things that we have. Then I don't really know if we will have a huge movement from the LGBT community. I think we won't have a huge movement, but at least we will be openly part of the popular movement in Guatemala, and that's, I think, is important to visualize that we exist and that we also are fighting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And to the three of you, we have some questions from people from the online. Are there any questions from the audience right now? Yes, please.
Hi, thank you for all your presentation. So in Colombia, for example, we experience, so these are data from Colombia Diversa, from the final report. In Colombia, we experienced in 2020, 175 people, LGBTIQ people, were victims from police brutality. This meant an increase of 60% respect to 2019. And in general, also violence against LGBTQ community in Colombia increased from 2019 to 2020. And that's really shocking because in 2020, most of the time in Colombia, because of the pandemic, we were in our houses, which are are supposed to be our safe spaces. So our safe spaces, as in the private sphere and also in the public sphere, the ones that are supposed to protect us, are not doing so. So I wanted to ask all of you if you have experienced that also in your country in Latin America, and if this can be like a regional concern that any kind of LGBTQ network within Latin America can try to work to, you know, to try to diminish this, like try to change cultural processes in the police institutions. In Colombia, we don't trust that much in the police institutions. So, like, what is happening in the region to try to mobilize and change?
So in Latin America, we have a really weak social security net. So we really support ourselves in hard times in our families. And the concept of family is really diverse and rich. You can have living in the same family, the grandmother, the daughter, the son, the uncle, your cousin, because it's cheaper. And some people get out of job, so they go to live with some family in another city and try to find a job there. So our social security net is family. But of course, there are big problems with that. A lot of people in Peru, and I think it's the same experience in Colombia and other countries, not only went back to their family's house during the pandemic, but also they went back to the closet because their families didn't accept them. I know a lot of cases of even trans persons that had to change their gender expression so the family could accept them at their family home, because that was the only way of surviving the pandemic. I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but at the beginning of the pandemic, there was this like commonplace, this like expression or this phrase that was used a lot in the media, saying that this was a democratic pandemic, a democratic virus, because it affected all at the same time, and we were all equal vulnerable to that. And that was so not true. That was such a misstatement, because people that were already in a vulnerable situation were even more vulnerable with the pandemic. And we see in every country, not only the problem with mental health, of stop being you, so your family could accept you back, so you could survive. Also the cases of domestic violence went up. And also there's a problem of institutional violence in our country that reflects in the idea that we don't have official data about LGBTQ people in our country. Especially in Peru, there's not a single statistic that talk about LGBT persons. It's the only community in a vulnerability situation that has none, that doesn't exist for government. If you ask for data about income in indigenous communities in the Amazonian jungle, you will get it. If you want to know exactly how many elderly people live in this specific district, you will get that information. If you want to know the percentage of people with disabilities that are unemployed, you will get it. But there's nothing about LGBTQ people. So if you want to know the state of violence, you have to go to Colombia Diversa, you have to go to LGBT organizations that, of course, they do their work with little resources, trying to do, they really do an heroic work, but they don't show you the full picture because they don't have the technical capability to show you the complete picture. So not only LGBTQ people are confronting a more violent situation during the pandemic, but you have a government and a whole system that is looking other way, and it's invisible. It's not visible. Thank you. There's no visibilization of this particular issue because LGBTQ people does not exist. So how do you address the problem? How do you design and fight for public policies if you are still fighting for people to be recognized as citizens that deserve their identity to be shown in these official statistics?
Tamara, do you want to add something to that question?
Yes, and excuse me if it's not directly addressing the question of Colombia specifically, but somehow it is addressing the deep concern, which is related to the role of families as a network for support of LGBTI people, particularly young LGBTI people. And the figures that we have, the data that we have, which is very, as it has been said, is not produced, in my case, it's not produced by the government. You don't have here any data available for anything in Venezuela for at least 13, 14, maybe 20 years in some cases now. But instead, civil society organizations have tried to produce this kind of data. And in one of these research that was conducted by myself, I found something that was heartbreaking, if you want. It's that the aggressions against LGBTI people, that was before pandemics, just before the pandemics, the verbal aggressions within the families were up to 70%, and in average overall were around 60%. And in case of physical aggressions within the families, they were around 30% of the persons. And the main aggressor was the mother. That was something that I found in this research that was against my common sense beliefs. And I started to ask myself how mothers actually were part of the system of reproducing the heteropatriarchal system within the families. And even when the families are monomaternal families, they reproduce these heteropatriarchal roles and structures. And I guess something, a part of this, the answer to your question might come from these reflections. Thank you.
We have two questions for the audience. I want to ask them, I want to start with Sandra in the next part. So I think we can mix these two questions from people online. They are asking, how can we bring the people who is in the middle? And I think you mentioned, Alberto, in the meeting before, that there is this misconception that there is a lot of people who is conservative or extreme conservative. And what you mentioned is that there's a few people who is in the far right and the far left, and there is some people in the middle that is trying to see where the wind blows, right? So what would you say, starting with Sandra, that is the best strategy to try to bring these people to our side? And how do we fight those who are really strong conservatives? How do we stop them to getting in the way of our rights? Sandra?
Well, I think some people are against our rights and our life because they are really homophobic, like really, and it's hard for them to change. But others because it's also a political reasons. Is they are using churches, they are using that this homophobic, transphobic, and lesbophobic issue for votes. That no, it's utilitarian way to do it, and I think in society we need to change we need to change how people think about ourselves, but also to change the narrative that they receive, and that's a challenge for us, no? And it's always a challenge how to present ourselves as we are, and to present ourselves that we are as other people, that we pay taxes, that we are teachers, that we are doctors, that we are everything and everywhere, and that we are not the bad ones who wants to destroy families, etc. Then that's a huge task and difficult that we have. And the one that I want also to answer before was that, yes, we have networks in Latin America, and trans people have networks in Latin America, and LGBT people have networks in Latin America, and also in the politics, political party side, there is a network where different people, members of political parties, are getting together in order to work together, because we learn from each other, and because we can find better ways to continue our work. Then because the task is very difficult, and because the context is very difficult, then we need to strengthen our the networks and strengthen ourselves to find the way to talk to society and to change the homophobic that is in society.
I think that Sandra said something that's really important. It's a visibility. And I want to build on that. A lot of times when we address this kind of issues, we have the tendency of being really abstract. We talk about freedom, we talk about dignity. And what I feel it works better is when you narrow down the discussion to an everyday basis. So you don't talk about marriage equality because this is a way of respecting my freedom. You start talking about your everyday life. I got married 2 months ago, and now my husband has my health insurance here in the States, and I'm really happy about it. But in Peru, he will not have health insurance. What that looks like? Or what happens if there is a case of domestic violence in a same-sex couple? None of the laws that are created to challenge, to confront domestic violence applies. Because in countries where there's no same-sex couple recognition, it's like they are 2 roommates living together. And in Congress, I told this anecdote before, but this is a brand new audience, so I will tell it again. I remember I had this friend that was a congresswoman from a really conservative party. And she's a brilliant lawyer. And we always had these fights about LGBT rights. And of course, we talk about equality, non-discrimination principle, about the human rights treaties, and she always had the conservative response, the conservative answer to every single legal argument I used. And one day I discovered that she was not only really proud of her legal knowledge and being a congresswoman, but she was also really proud of being a mom. She had 4 beautiful kids, and she was really proud. She really thinks that is a really important part of her identity. So I went to her and said, give me just 15 minutes of your time, for a meeting. There's a group of people that I want you to meet. And I introduced to her LGBT association. But it's not an association of LGBT people. It's from LGBT, or I will rephrase that. It's parents of LGBT kids. Mothers and fathers, usually mothers, they are more involved, of LGBT kids. And they had an honest conversation about this issue. And it was not about, I don't want my son to not be able to fulfill his, to have the access to all the rights as a citizen in a democracy, because no, it was like, okay, my son is going to school and he's having this problem and her teacher told him this, and I'm really worried that he will not find a way to be happy because I'm worried that he will not get a job. And what if he gets in love? He will not have a family, and I want him to have a family and be happy. And it was a really down-to-earth discussion. Not only did she start changing her, my friend, the congresswoman, start changing her mind, but she ended up co-sponsoring one of my LGBT bills. And for me, it was, and this, I would love to say that it was a story of my first month in Congress. This was year 4. I really wish I learned this lesson before, but for me, it was a lesson, a life lesson, on how you can humanize these debates, and it would be a better way of creating or generating empathy and maybe moving forward. This, of course, is not going to work with the ultra-conservative and the people that are politically and sometimes economically invest in these anti-LGBT movements. But it's going to work with the middle and with all the people that are open to see and to learn from other experience. That right now, they say no, but behind that no, usually there's a lot of things that they don't know about, and they just say no, like a defense act.
Thank you. Amanda?
Yeah, so Alberto, in the earlier session, you said that people voted for you in spite of your sexuality. So do you think that what you just said in terms of the congresswoman, like, do you think that kind of thing can apply to you, sort of leveraging like the fact that you have people who, how do you get people who voted in spite of that to vote with you on that, like for that to be, you know, it's like use that to convert them into a more open-minded, like, oh, they love your how you handle this and they love how you handle that, and they don't like your sexuality, but eventually maybe they'll come to like how do you get them to like it because of all these other things that you're doing? You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
how do you leverage
Yes.
that?
Summarize the question.
Yeah.
Yes, the question is how to, when I told earlier that I ran for re-election and I got the second most high votes in the country. And I was really happy about that. But that didn't mean that all the people that voted for me were in favor of the LGBT agenda. I work other issues in Congress, and a lot of my constituencies told me directly, I'm not in favor of this particular issue, but I like the way you debate, or the way you work, or the way you express yourself in Congress. So the question is, okay, these people have some political connection to you. How do you move it forward, the LGBT agenda? How do you make them be more open to this issue? And I think that here visibility is key. And we see once again the importance of representation. I get a lot of messages in my Instagram account from parents of LGBT kids that write me to tell me that, and it's awful because I'm not a psychologist, that sometimes I don't know, I'm just a lawyer, and they ask me for advice, and it's like really, it really stresses. stressed to me. For one hand, I'm really glad that I have that kind of connection and they feel confident to write to me, but on the other hand, I'm terrified. But the thing is, they tell me that their kids just came out of the closet and they didn't react well, but then they thought that there were people like me or a famous actress or a famous movie director in Peru, and they start giving content to what LGBT people looks like. Because for a long time in Latin America, and that's even the case today, the idea of the LGBT person was created by the media. And the media has changed a lot in Peru, but traditionally, the LGBT subject was for comic relief in comedy programs, or was the main subject in a horrendous crime in the news in the news programs. So of course, when these parents that love their kids, that there's no question about it, received this information, they didn't know how to imagine their children's future. And the only reference they got was the comedy clown or the guy that got killed because he was LGBT. And you know, parents want their kids to be happy. Usually, the discussion in their teenage years started when they discover their notion of happiness is different from the notion of happiness of their teenage kids. But still, it's the same ground. They want us to be happy. And I think that visibility shows them different paths. That, okay, he can be a lawyer, or he can be a politician, or he can be a famous chef, or she can be a doctor. It starts showing ways of that happiness to actually occur.
Yes.
I have a question for Tamara about the context. A question for Tamara about the context of Venezuela and how do you navigate your agenda in such a crisis. And another topic, a very different question. I know you're a fellow of Vital Voices, and how does being a part of a network also enabled you to accomplish your works? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. I do appreciate it very much. Yes, Venezuela, it's really facing a horrendous crisis from the economical and political point of view. 6 million people have fled the country which is around 25% of the country in around 5 years, and that remains the case. But it has opened some opportunities from the point of view of international contributions and help, because in the past, Venezuela, and still nowadays, is considered to be a middle high class income country, which prevents Venezuelan NGOs to receive and get financial help from abroad and from official organisms, etc., for any cause. And now, what happened is that the fact that this horrendous crisis is affecting us all has opened some doors for international help for NGOs and small contribution, in fact. But that is how you see now, for instance, that new organizations have been created outside Caracas. In the past, only the organizations were only created here in Caracas. And now you have, for instance, organization Somos that it's having a huge impact in the area of Los Andes. And now it's creating other let's say, branches around the country. And now you see small organizations that are very new, that are created by young people. And that is because this window that has been opened by the fact that this horrendous crisis is affecting everyone. And in this context, some windows are open for contributions, and that's the good part of all this horrendous situation.
Thank you, Tamara. We have just 10 minutes left. So we're gonna, we know we have more questions, but we have to go to the final remarks. We're gonna start with Sandra. Your final remarks, and also I think that most of the people in this room is gonna work in politics when we finish, or related to politics. So what advice would you give with your final remarks as well to us, to the people who want to work and advocating for LGBTQ rights or support LGBTQ rights in policies and politics as well? Sandra?
Thank you. Well, when you are in a position of in the Congress or in the executives, you are as a representative of a population, even though you work as a representative. In my case, I was representing the community, but also women, the feminists, and indigenous people. Then that part is very important, that you represent well the population, the community, but also that you work together with the people. It's like, even though you are in those or no, even though, because you are in those positions, you need to strengthen your relationship with the community, with the organizations, with the civil society, with the communities, the rural communities, or because it's and to work together is because you know better the situation, but also because you represent better the people, but also because you open spaces for those people. Then the proposals that you introduce are rooted in reality, and are rooted with people, with the people who are asking or asking for that, or waiting for someone to talk about it, or waiting for someone to really represent them. Then the advice is to maintain the relationship with the people, with the communities, and to prepare yourself to represent the people in the place that you are, and also to strengthen the relationship with LGBT community, but also with other communities, in the way that we can, and that you can work in a different, you can work in a general proposals too, not just for one community. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Tamara?
Yes, I will go in the same line as Sandra. I think the world, it's desperate for, in the case of LGBTI people, but as well in the case of women, in the case of people with disability, in the case of all minorities. They are desperate for relevant and positive examples. And I guess that to the extent that we are able to be positive examples for everyone, we can change people's minds. I'm gonna just finish with an anecdote very briefly. I went out of my office a few years ago, and I found a woman in the street that asked me, "Oh, you are a Doctora Tamara Adrián. Oh, I wanted so much to know you because you changed my life." I just, okay, thank you. What happened to you? And then I bias bias is always present. I told myself, oh, this is probably a lesbian woman that came out of the closet. No, that was not the case. She told me, listen, I live with a man for 40 years, and he actually was exerting violence against me. And by hearing you, there is always a moment where you can decide to be happy. I decided to leave him, and now I'm working by myself. I'm not earning a lot of money, but I'm very happy, and I want to know you to know that you are part of this happiness. And I was so moved by that. And that didn't have to do anything with my main activity with LGBTI people, that I think that visibility and positive examples are the way you can change the world.
Thank you, Tamara.
Yes, there's a lot of people interested in the public service, and that's great. It can be as an elected official, but also working in government, in different levels of government. And my main recommendation, I used to work before being a congressman in a local government, so I have those experience. My main recommendation is never assume what people want. Listen to them directly and build the answers together. Because sometimes you feel like, okay, I'm gay, so I know what the community wants. And you irrogate yourself like this superpower of really knowing what the LGBTQ people want. And then you go and talk to some of the activists and discover that there's a whole part that you're not really noticing because of intersectionality and because of a lot of other issues. And the same thing happened in any other public problem. Usually we try to approach the issue from an academic stand, like, oh, I have studied this master's degree, or I have been working this issue 10 years, and we assume that we can tell people, tell to the people what the answer is to the problems. And actually, usually, the people that are having the problem is the people that have the best ideas or solution. Maybe not explained in a very technical way, but still, they will give you a lot of information and experience that will be really good for your job. So never assume, and always try to make democracy a daily exercise and not just a voting thing every 2 or 4 years.
Thank you so much, Alberto, and Tamara and Sandra as well. And we're really happy to have you today. Thank you to the audience, to the people who is online. Thank you for staying with us to the end, and for the audience in person as well. I think we will be very, it's really important for us to remember that the LGBTQ community is a community that kind of bring all of the other communities together. There is not one single group or community in the world that does not have LGBTQ people, even evangelists. So I think working for us is working for you as well, for everyone. And we hope that what has been said today ignites a fire in you to work for LGBTQ rights, to support LGBTQ rights, and if not, at least not being different when LGBTQ rights are spoken in any table. So thank you all for joining us today. I thank you again to the 3 magnificent speakers we had. Thank you so much. You're free to go. Thank you.